It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Erin Aspenlieder. She is normally the assistant director at the McPherson Institute here on campus. It's our teaching and learning institute. They run all sorts of amazing programs. Uh, but sometimes emergencies happen, like AI, and sometimes you need superheroes. And so Erin has been seconded to the office of the provost. Her title now is special advisor on all things AI, and she's emerged as our champion on campus. And so anytime I ever have a question about AI and just life advice in general, I turn to Erin. So please join me in welcoming Erin, our final speaker.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here on a Friday afternoon in the middle of July. Some of you have found the Menti poll that I put up as you were coming in. If you haven't had a chance to find it and you'd like to participate, you can go to menti.com and use the code 85312080. And the question there is, I'm hoping this talk might address or answer this question. And then in a second, I'm going to answer those questions. I have a slide deck and I'm just going to set them all on fire. That's not true. I've hopefully anticipated many of your questions. And if I haven't, we will adjust. As we're getting those questions coming in, I wanted to take a second to acknowledge that McMaster is located on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and Mississaugas of the New Credit, and then Anishinaabe people. And that my presentation in the PowerPoint slides that you're going to see include almost entirely AI-generated images. So if you are interested in what the prompts are for the images, you can keep doing the Menti as well. You can follow along with my slides at bit.ly/edcog24. And if you have those slides, or you can use the QR code, any of the prompts that I used for the AI-generated images are available in the alt text of the slides. So if you're curious, the tool that I used was Midjourney, and I've used those prompts exactly as they appear in the alt text. What else do you need to know? You can ask me questions at any point throughout the presentation. I'll stop and ask, does anybody have any questions? But I am a relatively informal presenter and I really benefit from the energy in the room. So if you've got something and you're hoping to find out the answer, please just throw up a virtual or a physical hand. I think that's it for my preamble. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how, if you were an educator in your class and you opened your lecture, you were curious about what your students wanted to know about the topic for the day, you could take a question like that, and you could take all of those responses, you could copy them into an AI tool. So I'm showing you here a tool called Claude. It's by a company named Anthropic. And what I've done is I've given Claude the prompt. These are some of the questions the audience at the Education and Cognition Conference of McMaster would like to explore in a talk about AI and student motivation. Perform a thematic analysis of the questions, and then group them by theme and give me 1 or 2 points I should address about each theme. And so I just say, okay, Claude, go to work. And it's giving me a thematic analysis of the questions that you folks are interested in. And so now easier for me to think about in the presentation, how am I going to address those? For students in your class, if you're presenting, they know what the lecture topic is for the day, they've done the reading, the magic scenario has happened, everybody comes to class prepared, here are their questions. Or in the more likely scenario, maybe there's some uneven preparation for the class and the students are curious about a key piece of that talk. You can then build and address your lecture or your presentation to things that they're interested in. So here we've got AI as a learning tool. So how could we be using AI to actually support learning potential uses? Academic integrity and assessment. I would be out of a job in my special advisor role if academic integrity and assessment and AI got resolved. Integration into the curriculum, fantastic. Faculty preparedness. How do we prepare our faculty members? What do they need to know? Ethical considerations and the future of AI in academia. Tremendously useful for me to know that my presentation is not going to bore you to tears, because that is the kind of thing I'm hoping I will be addressing. So we did the Menti part, the first question there. The second question is a question about your beliefs in that Menti. So if you haven't opened the poll, you didn't have a question, can you please open it now? I'm sorry, I'm doing a lot of toggling between screens. The second one asks you whether you think AI is going to be helpful or harmful for student learning. So I think artificial intelligence can benefit student learning. Strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree, unsure. This is my question to figure out how much persuasion do I need to do here. Often, and Joe's introduction reflects this, I get introduced as the AI person on campus, and that's usually in people's mind in an instance of what I am now learning is confirmation bias, is a conclusion that I am an AI enthusiast, that I am here to sell you all on the mission of artificial intelligence for teaching and learning. Not so. I am an AI expert. I know how generative AI can work for student learning, and I know some of the risks around it, and I am not here on a bandwagon show to persuade you that you must use it for everything. But it looks like about 25, 26, I should stop the poll. More of us agree it can be beneficial, and some of us disagree, and some of us aren't sure. So let's hope that the rest of the presentation gives us some instances of how it can be useful. The goal of my talk is to really shift our thinking from, is AI a harm? Is AI a benefit? To thinking about AI is here. Artificial intelligence, generative AI is widely available for students, and there are instances where it can be helpful for student learning. So instead of thinking about, is it, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and the destruction of humanity, or is it going to save us all from climate change and the answer to all of our medical woes and worries? Instead of that sort of diametrically opposed position, we want to start thinking about when, how, why might we be using these tools to support student learning, and how. My little plan is to talk about those risks and harms, because I think it's important as educators, as students, to be grounded in what we know some of the risks and harms are generally of AI and also to student learning, some of the benefits, and then why you might want to go about using it. Number one AI risk and harm. Anyone want to, just like from my list, what do you think it is? False data, misinformation, hallucinations. Yeah, please. Privacy and data use. So the way in which these companies are scraping up and collecting your data, whether you want them to or not. My guess is that if we go through this list together, each of you will have a slightly different sense of what the biggest risk and harm are. There are a number of really significant ones. Important to talk with your students and with your colleagues about where those risks and harms are, because there are some of the risks, like hallucination, the way in which AI tools falsely create information, that can be mitigated against. And there are others that are less easy to circumvent. So that first one around accuracy and reliability, we know that generative AI tools, because they are prediction models, they look at a large data set, they make a statistical prediction about what an output should be. Sometimes that statistical output is incorrect. And so if you're using these tools in your classes, you want to think about, is this content or skill one that it's important for my students to absolutely 100% get the factually right answer? And if that's the case, how am I going to ensure that I, as the educator, set that up for them? If it's something where it might be, and you've probably done this before as educators, you've assigned a topic for groups to work on their own, or you've given them a discussion topic, or it's something that you've left them to go research on their own and find out. You can think of AI as another partner in that group discussion, or another peer, where maybe it's giving false information, maybe it's giving something that isn't exactly the most relevant. Your job as an educator has always been to introduce the factually true, the most important, the most relevant information. Same in the case where you're using AI as a learning tool in your classes. There are also strategies you can use around retrieval augmented generation, or RAG generation, where some of the tools, and I'll show you with ChatGPT and with Claude, you can give those models a set group of texts or information that you want them to interact with. And when you do that, the risk of hallucination drops quite significantly. So if you want students to be developing practice test questions, which you talked about earlier today, you want them to be priming their learning before the lecture or afterwards, you could be using a tool where that information is readily available in the tool itself. Tied to hallucination risk, this is not necessarily an education-based risk, but certainly one for humanity, is around misinformation, the ways and disinformation, the ways in which these tools can create incredibly realistic text, audio, visuals, images, sound that you or your students wouldn't be able to recognize as AI generated. Often this comes up from educators who say, how do I know my students wrote this piece? How do I detect whether this was AI generated or human generated? And I'm not going to be the first one to spoil your day. There is no reliable way to detect AI generated anything, images, video, audio. It's a problem that AI companies themselves are trying to solve through things like watermarking. But right now, there is no good answer. So if you're thinking about, from an academic integrity perspective, cultivating a culture of integrity across the institution within your classes, and if it is an incredibly high stakes assessment, you want to be able to observe and see and talk with your students about what they are creating. Anyone have any questions about that point? I don't spend a ton of time on academic integrity in this talk, but I know it was one of the key questions that was in the room when I came in. So anyone elaborating or other thoughts on the other AI, the academic integrity AI? Yeah, please. So the question there was, are you updating the policy around academic integrity to respond to artificial intelligence? McMaster has. We updated our academic integrity policy last winter, encouraging other institutions. There's an interest in, like, should we have an AI policy for our institution? And most of what I'm seeing across Canada and across the world is not a single AI policy, but rather thinking about what are the range of institutional policies, like a course management policy, an academic integrity policy, a student accommodations policy, where AI would infuse that, because it's not like AI sits in a box like a calculator does. It is in everything that we are doing. Any other questions on integrity before I keep going with risk and harm? Anything from the online folks? Okay, great. Environmental impact is one that students are, and all of us should and ought to be concerned about. The companies and the models that are being built require a lot of water and energy in the production of the model, the sort of training of it, as well as in the ongoing operations. There are very recently, Meta has developed new methods of training a model that show a significant reduction in the amount of energy use for training. That is not to say that these are likely to become energy neutral models in development or training anytime soon. And so something to think about with your students and yourself is, if we are using this tool in our class, how are we talking about the environmental harm? How are we thinking about addressing that as a group? And sort of globally and internationally and nationally, what kinds of moves do we want to be making to invest in offsetting or other environmentally helpful responses? Privacy and data usage came from our colleague over here. These companies are not interested in giving you your data to hold for yourself. They're not really interested in data sovereignty, and that's not a unkind thing on the part of these companies. They need the data in order to train the models. They're very interested in collecting prompts that come in, but also the data that's publicly available on the web. It's how most of the models were trained, was scraping that information, usually without the consent of the artists, creators, and writers who populated that content. So questions around copyright and IP have not been resolved, either within Canada or internationally. There are a number of really significant lawsuits underway trying to figure out what do these companies and these tools mean for copyright, yet to be concluded. Within McMaster, this would be different for every institution. McMaster has an enterprise-wide license with Microsoft. So if you are a McMaster faculty, staff, or student, and you sign into Microsoft Copilot using your McMaster ID, your single sign-on, your data is protected and confidential. Your prompt information does not go to Microsoft, and it does not go to McMaster. It's in what's called a closed tenant. Check out what your own institution offers there. If you're using it in that way, you can invite your students yourself to put anything into that prompt window and know that it is being kept in a data secure way. We've talked a little bit already about the risks around academic integrity. From our students, there's a risk and a fear about, am I allowed to use AI? Am I not allowed to use AI? How can I use it in my classes? Here at McMaster, we've taken an approach of individual instructors set the course terms for how students can use artificial intelligence. We just, the Office of the Vice Provost Teaching and Learning and the library did a survey of McMaster students and found that even with that a policy, students are really confused. They're confused about, can I use it for studying? Can I use it to come up with flashcards? Or is that a violation of the academic integrity policy? If I use it to brainstorm an idea, but then I write the entire paper myself, is that a violation of the academic integrity policy? So what we're moving towards here is a more granular set of expectations and really trying to separate out AI use in assessment from AI use for studying and learning. And what I'll be talking about in the later part of this presentation is where can AI be used for learning? If we think about not in how is it going to show up in the assessment where maybe I have the students generate an AI-generated essay and then critique it. There are lots of great examples of integrating AI into the assessments in the course, but fewer really thinking through the learning practices. You had a question, please. Yeah, so this is a great question. The question is, if I'm an instructor and I've created a fantastic case study and I don't intend or want ChatGPT to have access to my case study, how do I stop my students from uploading it and working with that case study? In the case of McMaster's enterprise-wide license, if the student were to put the case study into Copilot, neither Microsoft nor McMaster is collecting that case study. As soon as you close the window, it disappears. Not reassuring for the 10,000 other AI tools that are out there, but in the case of Copilot and McMaster, that would be, as an educator, one way that you could work with AI in your classroom with relative comfort around privacy. Any other questions? Certainly a risk and concern about equity and access to tools. I've talked a little bit now about Copilot at McMaster. When ChatGPT first launched, a lot of concern about paid subscription models. So many of the most powerful tools, including the Anthropic one I showed you at the outset, have a monthly subscription fee. Not fair if some students can afford access to those tools and others can't. So if you are an educator thinking about using AI as a study tool within your courses, really recommending that you use an enterprise-wide tool. And if your institution doesn't have one, advocating for that access, because if you're planning to use it in your courses. The over-reliance on AI, I think this is a concern that students have, and certainly those that faculty have as well. If I let my students use AI to generate and brainstorm their essay topics, are they going to lose the ability to brainstorm on their own? Sort of in the same anxiety that arrived with the calculator, if we let students use calculators, are they going to not know how to do long division anymore? Probably. Probably they will lose the ability to do long division. There are skills and subject matter expertise that we cannot abandon. We cannot, because the models hallucinate, we need subject matter experts who can evaluate those outputs. There are concrete, essential learning, when you think about the undergraduate degree level expectations or graduate degree level expectations, that we cannot forego. So as educators, really needing to think about within the course that I'm teaching, if it's essential that my students, my PhDs in English and Cultural Studies, if it's essential to write and to analyze through writing, how am I going to structure my assessments to ensure that students can do that? And how am I going to structure the learning activities where AI might be a partner in some of that learning, but my student at the end of the day can confidently demonstrate the skill or the knowledge? It is a really sticky, awful problem. I'm sorry to be presenting it to you just after a pandemic. You're like, I already redesigned my course, Erin. I don't want to do it again. And the changing role of educators. Many of these tools are better teachers than some teachers we know. They are responsive, they are timely, they are specific, they give personalized feedback, they give it the instant that you want it. They're always kind, they're always helpful, they're always cheerful, and you want to kick them. But what they can't do is relationship. They can't get to know students, they can't understand students in their unique personhood and context, and they can't engage in the dialogic relationship that is learning. That does not mean the role of educators is not going to change. It is. How we teach and what we teach is changing, and preparing yourself for that change and dealing with the range of feelings that come from that is hard, and I'm not going to swear because it's being recorded, difficult work. Any questions on risks and harms before I speed up? All right, some of the benefits. Efficiency. These tools make you much more efficient. They often expand what you're capable of doing. I can code now. I mentioned English and cultural studies, not a skill that I developed at any other point, but can now do. They offer personalized learning, translation, accessibility. If you think about captioning as a sort of different kind of artificial intelligence from generative artificial intelligence, but a small example of accessibility. If you know a neurodiverse person in your life who wants to practice engaging in a social situation, what better format to do that in a simulated environment, in an AI-generated simulation? Digital literacy and work readiness as a sort of responsibility. And one of the questions that came up was, how do we prepare students for the world of work where AI is going to be integrated into what we do? And then building on the best of what we know about motivating learning. There is a benefit there. If you think about why you would bother, I'm trying to make the argument here that AI can be a helpful learning tool. Knowing that there are those risks and harms, how do you account for those risks and harms in a way that will still support student learning? If you start from the premise of AI is another tool in the range of teaching tools you've had available to you, you've had clickers, you've had Menti polls, you've had wikis, you've had textbooks, you've had a whole host of tools, you now have another tool. You have the tool of an AI chatbot or an AI simulator or an AI platform. Please do not leave this talk and go, I'm going to change my course in the next semester. I'm going to integrate AI. I'm just going to throw in an assessment about AI that I think might be fun. Just like with any educational technology tool, you don't want to just use the tool because it's there and it's available and it's kind of fun and kind of flashy. You want to be using the tool with some purpose around your pedagogical goal. So if your goal is I want to encourage critical thinking, how could any range of educational technology tools, including AI, be used to support that aim? So really always beginning from what is my learning outcome? What am I hoping to accomplish? And then the second piece is that AI tools can be used at scale to do what we know best supports student learning and student motivation. You probably know that if you had a class of 10, it would be really easy or much easier for you to give personalized feedback on drafts of student work. It would be much easier for you to look at practice questions that the student has come up with, to engage in conversation and dialogue, to have that student explain concepts to you. If you are teaching a class even this large, it's not possible to do that and still be a person who sleeps at night and sometimes goes for a run. You need an AI tool that allows at scale some of those practices. So let's see what that could look like. I've called this a very brief and cursory overview. Please do not quiz me in any form. This is not my comprehensive exams on educational psychology. This is Erin's hot take on what we know about learning and motivation. From a review article of learning strategies, and these have come up over the course of the conference, some of the things we know support student learning. We're not thinking here about assessment. Self-testing, so that chance to test myself before, during, and after being introduced to a new concept. Distributed practice, so that sense of I'm practicing or testing myself or understanding the concept at multiple points throughout the semester and multiple points throughout my life. Elaborative interrogation and self-explanation. Elaborative interrogation, asking myself why something is happening and expanding on that why. Self-explanation, explaining to myself a concept. Teaching is that. I've never learned anything better than when I have to teach it. And so that chance for a student to explain to somebody else, here's what this concept is, here's what this skill is, and why does it matter? An interleaved practice, which you have also talked about, that sort of idea of not looking at content area in chunks, but thinking about how different pieces of content skill values interweave and interconnect. From the motivation literature, those ideas of how do we get students to care about what I'm teaching, self-efficacy and competence, can I do this? Do I have the skills required? And really importantly, is this task challenging enough for me to do it? Is it worth my time? Is it worth my energy to do the hard work of learning? Meaning and value, is it important? Is this something that I'm going to use later in my life? Is it key to my discipline? Is it something that matters within the context of this course? Is it worth 60% of my grade? Or is it something that I'm intrinsically deeply motivated to understand? And cause and control. Do I have control over learning it? Like, do I have the skills within myself and within my context and environment in order to be able to engage with this work, or is it beyond my control? If we take the assumptions here that these are good learning skills and these are things that motivate students, let's look at some examples of how AI can be used at scale to help us as educators do some of this work with our students. Sound okay? Getting thumbs up, let's do it. So the first practice I would suggest is one of authentic learning and assessment through simulations. So simulations, you can think about, I'm going to show you a couple of different examples. You can do ones that are like high tech. You've got like the video simulation and somebody's talking with your student in like maybe you're a physiotherapist and you've got the virtual physiotherapy clinic happening. You can think about it in a low tech form of a prompt. Either way, with AI, you have a problem. What is the problem? I give ChatGPT my physiotherapy prompt. I'm doing my scenario with ChatGPT. What's the big risk for student learning? Yeah. Yes, it hallucinates, right? It's like, you know what? You've got your person coming in, they're presenting with a hamstring pull. What are you supposed to do? The student answers, and the AI says something entirely fabricated, but the student doesn't know because the student's learning the thing. This is the same problem you would have if you assigned your students in a group a case study and told them to work through the case study. So you as the educator need to set up the simulation. You need to make sure that they have the grounding in the knowledge already. They've read the textbook, you've lectured on the topic, you put them in the simulation, and then you debrief it afterwards. So you're checking, what did you take out of that simulation? What did you learn? What was the content? Let's address that in class. The other piece in the simulations, you can set them up to be Socratic. So Socratic simulations are ones where the AI is only ever asking questions. So you set up the simulation where I'm the patient in the physiotherapy clinic. My simulator is only ever going to say, and how long has that been hurting for? And what have you done to treat it already? Or if you're thinking about a simulation in a business case where it's just your entrepreneur asking you further follow-up questions, completely bypasses that risk of hallucinations. I will emphasize here, though, that for any of these exercises to be effective, students must have an understanding of the topic so they can apply their knowledge. Each simulation should have that in-class discussion or debrief. So let's just see two examples. The first one comes from our colleagues at UBC. I don't care if there's audio. What they've set up for their law students is a virtual moot court. Moot court is where the law students go when they practice presenting before a judge. And the colleagues at UBC heard from the law students that it was incredibly anxiety producing to do their first moot. And so they built the virtual simulator using Socratic simulation where the student could practice being in moot court. They actually didn't care about the content at all. The goal was to give students that reduced anxiety in presentation and practicing in presentation. So you can find the link to that one in the presentation itself if you want to learn more. They also have a nurse practitioner one where they've added the element of VR, virtual reality. So the student wears a virtual reality headset, is interacting with an AI-generated patient. So the AI-generated patient it's not pre-programmed what that patient will say. The patient responds in real time using generative artificial intelligence to whatever the student suggests. And because they're using that retrieval augmented generation that I talked about, they have like a preset of content that the characters are drawing from, less likely to have that risk of hallucination. You're like, Erin, that's wonderful. There's no way my institution has the capability, the capacity to create this wonderful environment for me. Have no fear, folks. You can use something as basic as ChatGPT. This is one, I'm going to make it bigger for you. And I will put the prompts in the PowerPoint presentation, and I will tell you, actually, the place to get all of these prompts is moreusefulthings.com. Ethan Mollick does not pay me anything. Ethan Mollick is a faculty member at the Wharton School at UPenn who has written a fantastic book called Co-Intelligence, Living and Working with AI, and has created, he has a newsletter that comes out weekly and a prompt library. And the prompt library is full of tremendously helpful prompts for student learning and for instructors. And so the one I'm showing you here, the patient interview, comes from Ethan Mollick. And so I want to do deliberative practice about interviewing a patient in a nursing clinic. You're my nursing teacher. Here's the scenario. I want to do this simulation. The simulation starts. Mr. Thompson, 40-year-old male, comes in with a common cold. He's uncomfortable. I have to have the scenario. So I start, good morning, Mr. Thompson. I understand you're not feeling well. What seems to be the problem? Mr. Thompson, the character, gives me a response. Great, super helpful. The key to the learning part is, though, ChatGPT then gives me immediate feedback about my response to Mr. Thompson. It tells me what I did well in engaging with Mr. Thompson, as well as what I can do to improve. So then I take ChatGPT's advice and what I know about what happens in a patient interview, and I keep going. But then I wanted to show you what happens if I'm a bit of a jerk. So I respond to Mr. Thompson, to be honest, Mr. Thompson, this just sounds like an ordinary cold, and everyone this time of year is feeling sick. The best you can do is just rest and wait to get better. True things that my doctor in a million years would never say to me. Fine, maybe it's happened. And then the feedback from ChatGPT is, that's not very nice. You need to take a patient-centered approach. And so you're getting that kind of immediate feedback. You could do a simulation like that. You could take that prompt and adapt it to any discipline, but you could also adapt that prompt to the kinds of skills and questions that are important in your course. So if you're trying to cultivate reflective practice, after the simulation, you could get ChatGPT to say, I want you as the student now to reflect on what you've learned. Or I want you to, as the student, explain the key concept from this simulation that you didn't understand very well. You can structure that into your prompt any way you like. Are there any questions about simulations before I give you another strategy? We're happy, we're good? Okay. Explanations and feedback. So we know explaining it to yourself, that interleaved practice, that elaborative interrogation, really helpful for learning. You can use a prompt there to identify existing knowledge, explain concepts in your own words, connect ideas, reflect on learning, practice with varied questions. You as the educator do not have to come up with all of those questions. You don't have to have that exchange. If you would like to try this and you have a device available to you, if you want to go to bit.ly/tutor prompt, you should get access to my gigantic prompt, and you can play around with having ChatGPT explain any concept to you. I'm going to give you one where I learn about amortization because my mortgage is due. So here's the super long prompt. Sorry, I will ping back over just for a second. So it's bit.ly/tutor prompt. And ChatGPT starts by asking, what do you want to learn about? And why is it of interest to you? Because that's what my prompt required. It required ChatGPT to say, what do you want to know? Why are you interested? It could be, what do you want to know? Why are you interested? What do you already know about this topic? What do you already know about this topic, and how is it related to what we covered in class last week? The kind of prompting, the sort of what questions you ask, are the kinds of questions you would ask if you had the privilege of just one-on-one tutoring your student over the course of a semester. If it was just you and Joe, what kinds of questions would you be asking? So I say, I'm interested in amortization because my mortgage needs to be renewed. Very stressful. Here we go. What do you already know? What's your current understanding? I'm like, I don't know, something to do with about the length of my mortgage and interest rates. ChatGPT is a very kind tutor. It always tells me that I understand the basics. If you use a different tool, it won't be as kind. Anthropic's Claude is a little sassier. It'll be like, come on, lady, you've had a mortgage for 10 years. You should already know the answer to this one. I should not anthropomorphize. These are not people. The tools do have personalities. I shouldn't say that to psychologists. They don't have a person. I don't know what they have, but they have a tone. And then ChatGPT goes on to explain and gives me an example. You could mess around with those prompts in any way you like, but what about hallucination and bias, Erin? That could come up in the amortization example. It could come up, you might have stellar TAs. Every TA you've ever had might be the best TA you've ever had. You've probably had a couple TAs that weren't 100% experts in the area of your teaching, and they were still off teaching tutorials where perhaps there was a risk that they didn't explain it exactly the way you would have explained it. Think about ChatGPT like that, like a mediocre TA, where your job in the class is still to review the content, to explain, make sure that your students are understanding what's going on there. Feedback, you could, of course, also have students submit work if they were using Copilot, so you weren't worried about their data being collected. You could have students give a draft of something that they've been working on, and Copilot, ChatGPT, Claude can give fantastically detailed feedback, not just about sort of grammar and structure, but about the content of the ideas. And in the prompt library, under the student exercises, there's one down here called Devil's Advocate, where ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, whoever you want, will look at the student's work and pose challenging devil's advocate kinds of questions around that really push the students to think differently about their topic. Personalized learning, practice testing, distributed practice, competence, cause, and control, those are all being activated there. This is where you want students to have choice and choice in their level of challenge. I've got a prompt there where I'm asking the AI chatbot to create quiz questions for me. I've put in bold the part of the prompt that I like. If I get the question right, provide me with a more challenging question. If I get the question wrong, did I make a gross error on my slides? No, something else is funny. Hopefully. Is it me? Ah! Duolingo back. That's a relief. Sometimes you're like, I must have made a horrible gaffe. If I got the question wrong, give me an easier question. So the test itself is calibrating to how I perform on the practice questions. Do I have enough time to show you an example of that? Sure. So this is one where I gave myself a quiz on Canadian poetry. The first question, father of Canadian poetry. I gave an answer. Because I am truly actually an expert in Canadian poetry, I felt very confident in evaluating my outputs here. And the questions got harder and easier. Even though I'm an expert, I got a lot of them wrong. It's fine. Don't tell McMaster. They'll take away my degree. Reflection and metacognition. Really, we know these are essential skills for students for learning, but also for life. That ability to think about what I know, how I've learned it, and what I want to take away from my next experience. You can think about developing any kind of prompt you like that is geared around that metacognition and reflection. Different tools you could use. When I was playing around with just before the talk started, have any of you played with character AI before? Character AI is one where it builds characters from across history, pop culture. You could have a chit chat with Elon Musk. You could have a chit chat with Karl Marx, whoever you want. But the one that I found really interesting was a learning partner. Learning partner as a character AI gets me to teach the learning partner any concept I want. So you think again about that sort of self-explanation learning strategy. If you ask, learning partner asks, what do you want me to teach you? If I say I want to teach you confirmation bias, which I just learned about before my talk, so I practiced explaining confirmation bias, and it corrected me in one instance, corrected me correctly because I was testing if it was going to work. I have to sign into my email because I can't show you the chat thread, but please play around with it if it's of interest. You could worry about things like character AI, and you should, for the way AIs will likely become friends and relationship people in all of our lives. Or you could just know that that is coming and be fine with it. If those are compelling reasons why you might use AI, how would you get started? It really is right now your individual comfort and enthusiasm for it. If you're not interested, if you think it is the worst for you. If you've tried it once or twice and it didn't work and it was garbage and you're like, this doesn't know anything about me. Just curiosity. How many of you within the first 10 times you used a generative AI chatbot asked about yourself? Is it just me and Ian? That can't be true. You opened ChatGPT and were like, tell me about Erin Aspenlieder. Yes, thank you. And most of you are not famous. And so most of you, it would have made up something ridiculous because it doesn't know anything about you. It is not a search engine. You cannot treat generative AI tools as a one-to-one factual knowledge base, especially if you are the only Erin Aspenlieder in the entire world and your search history takes 1 page on Google. Generative AI does not know anything about you. So if you've tried it a few times, didn't work, go back and learn a little bit more about prompting. Use some of the prompts from more useful things. Experiment in understanding the complexity of your prompt will really drive the output that you're able to generate. Some of the key prompting suggestions there are to give your chatbot a role. So you are a helpful mentor, you are a tutor, you are a faculty member teaching in psychology, you are a mom of 2 picky eaters. Whatever the context is that you want the AI to play, that you tell it that. And then you give it as much specificity as you can. When you look at the more useful things prompts library, sometimes they're a page and a half long. You are not going to start there if you are new to generative AI. Where you should start is take other people's prompts, play with them, adapt them, ask your students the prompts that they are using for their studying, because my guess is they have created some really good prompts that would be tremendous to share with their peers. If you want to find out some additional resources as an educator, you can visit the McPherson Institute, where we have a number of really excellent ones. There are 2 guidebooks that are available, a podcast, AI Dialogues. We have a tool called the Assessment Partner that will help craft and build assessments with you using AI. And you can always, of course, reach out for a consultation. If you are not from McMaster, I'm imagining you have a teaching and learning center of some variety where there is someone there who knows a little bit about AI and who wants to talk to you. Reinforcing again that with any of these tools, with any of these prompts, if you leave today like a tiny bit excited, go back to what is my goal? What am I trying to teach? What am I trying to ensure that my students know, do, care about? And where might AI, among the other tools that I have available to me, be of value? Some references. And now I have 8 minutes for questions. What are some of your questions?
Thanks. I'm curious about the university's opinion on professors uploading their textbooks and their video recordings and becoming a virtual AI 24-hour accessible professor.
I cannot speak for the university. So in our McMaster has guidelines for the use of teaching and learning and AI. We don't address that question. We address whether faculty members can use AI in assessment. I think it would be, are you from McMaster? You're from another institution? Another institution? It would be valuable to talk with your professorial office about that. I think there are benefits and then there are certainly risks. And I think understanding where faculty members hold intellectual property, whether if they've created an open educational resource textbook and it's already freely available, or if you're a researcher publishing in an open access journal, the risks and considerations there around making your content available might seem lower, but it would depend on the content. And again, that sort of comfort readiness of the individual educator.
I spent a lot of my formative years reading science fiction, so I have an incredible antipathy towards AI, which is sort of ingrained in me. And I will also admit to perhaps being the only person in the room who has never asked one of the readily available AI things a question of any sort, except the one that I had to interact with the bank. And it took me 3 no, that answer was not helpful before it said, sorry, I'll get you a person.
Yeah.
You need to understand that I have absolutely no experience with these things.
I'm ready.
You've said a number of things that bother me a bunch.
Sure.
One of them is that one has the impression that these things have a personality. And that's an interactive style which is built into the programming.
Mhm.
How did it get there? So that's one. The other is, you're saying these things troll data in to develop their informational base, and yet they do not access the readily available factual databases which have some degree of
They do.
supervision in order to make sure that they are in fact accurate. You're saying that you have to. Sorry, so I'm wrong about that?
Yeah, you are.
That's
keep
twice.
going.
That's twice in my life.
Well, delighted. Give me your third one before I show you that one.
No, it's okay. So I was going to say, why don't they use?
It's a great question.
Confirmable databases. But the other part is, I guess I'm trying to see where the value comes in for an instructor who has to put the necessary information into their simulation in order to ensure that the students aren't hallucinated.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take the three of them. So the first is, how do the popular models come up with their what I've recognized as incorrect called personalities? The models are trained. So they are trained, some of them before they're released, some of them trained afterwards through reinforcement learning with human feedback. And they're trained around a set of parameters and guardrails. So some of those guardrails are so that the tools will not produce hateful, harmful, or less hateful, harmful outputs. And some of them are so that they'll be particular kinds of personalities. So Copilot tends to be quite bland because the company has designed the guardrails such that it will be more bland. Anthropic has a different philosophy, so Claude responds in different kinds of ways. There are lots of open source models where folks are creating the personalities that they want, like character AI. In terms of tools that will access set databases, McMaster has access to one called Cite AI. You could use something called Perplexity, which is another one where it's a subscription-based service. Cite AI's entire data set is peer-reviewed and academic publishers' input texts. So if you are a student doing a literature review and you use Cite AI, the only information it is pulling from is peer-reviewed and academic publishers' information. So you can feel confident that, and it provides direct links to those resources in your library. So if you want your student to then go read the resource, they can get it direct linked from the output. Your third question was, right. I mean, I could do the presentation again, but in the too long didn't read version, I think that even though there are risks of hallucination, the ways in which the tools offer personalized learning, responsive learning, give students the chance to do things like practice testing, concept explanation, getting immediate feedback, brings to an at-scale version of the best of what we know about how students learn. The risk of hallucination is still there in the same risk that people are sometimes wrong. And so you want your students to be certainly very conscious of the fact that the models sometimes get things wrong, but you would want that kind of critical thinking to be operating regardless of whether they're interacting with AI, but critical thinking in whatever scenario your student or yourself might find yourself in.
So I've sat on like academic concerns committee cases basically before, and I'm at Waterloo. And so something that profs and TAs aren't allowed to do is to take a student prompt that they think might have been written by ChatGPT and put it back into ChatGPT or whatever AI content and say, you know, was this written by you? Because it can often do that and say like based off these things. But instead, what I've seen is that they're allowed to use like a prompt similar to get like a generated essay and then compare the two. From like McMaster's perspective, like what have you done in these cases and what can be done to avoid, you know, false positives in a Turnitin case? Like what as an institution can be done to help support the people in these committees, you know, the student, the TA or the dean who's dealing with these matters in a way that is productive moving forward that addresses AI?
Great question. The AI detectors, whether it's using ChatGPT itself or a Turnitin or a GPT-0, do create false positives at a rate of 1 in 100, and that's on GPT 3.5. So as the models themselves get better, that rate of false positives go up. There's also some evidence to suggest that non-first language English speakers are more often identified as false positive AI generation, in part because their grammar is better than folks who learned English as their first language. What McMaster has done is, and I will put it up in a second, is prompting educators to have conversations. So McMaster's academic integrity policy relies on the preponderance of evidence pointing to academic dishonesty. We have a conversation guide that encourages and has a number of questions that the educator can use to talk with their students about what does this term mean? Or tell me about, you've used the word delve 6 times in this essay. What does delve mean to you? And you can talk through that. And if at the end of that conversation, you as the educator feel like the preponderance of evidence is that this was academic dishonesty moving forward. Rather than a sort of try to catch your student out and try to race to beat the AI, my recommendation would be to think holistically about the whole course. Recognize that AI has some benefit for student learning. Talk with your students about the appropriate use and the inappropriate use, why you want them to learn the essential skills without the use of AI, and then where you can, having some invigilated, in-person, process-based evaluations to feel more confident. There isn't a good answer, but that's the best if there are other ones, tell me. Yeah.
I just want to follow up on Norman's comments.
Yeah.
So I would say, myself personally, I'm very AI curious. And I feel like after watching this talk, I've been underutilizing AI. And I'm actually so excited to try out some of these tools. And you've really convinced me that prompt engineer is a future career skill that people will absolutely essentially need.
Maybe, not to say yes, but improv tells me I have to say yes and. Yes, and right now it's really important as the tool. This is the worst the AI is going to be. So right now your prompt does have to be really good. As the models themselves get better, the need to be like an exact prompt scientist will decline.
Okay.
But right now,
well, that actually sets up my question.
Yeah. Okay.
So my question is, I mean, we're still working through a lot of the bugs, obviously, hallucinations, etc. Can you paint me a picture 10 years from today? I mean, it obviously hugely speculative, but based on how you see things going, how do you think AI will play its role, in a more refined version? And I apologize for the question ahead of time.
So I'm asking Claude, how do you think AI will play a role in post-secondary education in 10 years? What will a standard first-year psychology classroom look like? What will students be doing? Okay, I'm going to try to answer it before Claude, and we'll see who's smarter. In 10 years, the students who are in your class will have grown up with learning alongside AI. They will be comfortable with what Malik calls a co-intelligence. And so AI can't autonomously make decisions. It can't autonomously take actions, but it can enhance and augment what I am capable of. Your assessments and assignments will all inherently, implicitly assume AI use because the skills that students will be graduating and the knowledge they'll be graduating with, you won't need to do long division. So what we will need to know and do will change. What will not change is relationships and values. That sort of sense of what are we doing? What's the purpose and value of post-secondary education? It is a human-centric, value-centered institution. We are not here as degree mills. We are here building caring, kind, critically aware citizens. And so that part doesn't shift, but the what and the how that we teach it radically does. Right? Skynet I've learned is Terminator. I've never seen it, but I am a science fiction enthusiast. So lots of that. Personalized learning, interactive tutors, virtual augmented reality, real-time data analysis. This is one of the AI predictions, is that you as the educator will be able to see in real time how students are performing on automated grading and feedback, adaptive textbooks, collaborative AI. Doesn't say anything about values, which might tell you about what's in the training set. I am out of time, so I will end it there. If you do have other questions that you'd like to talk about, please reach out to me at my email, aspenled@mcmaster.ca. I would love, truly, to talk more. Thank you.